Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 110. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the acclaimed Vermont author, Michael Fried Thall. Michael,
Barney,
how you doing?
I'm doing good.
Great.
Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. And I got to say, I'm really excited. So you're also one of the Rootstock Publishing folks, authors that you can find all about on Rootstock Publishing. And you just came out with a book 9 days ago, right? September 21st.
Yeah, the book officially came out on the 21st.
Right.
But, yeah.
And so when we're gonna jump in and talk a bit about your book, Horodno Burning, correct?
Correct.
Is that I said it right? Okay.
You did.
But it actually originally it was going to have a different name, if according to my research.
Your research is really impeccable.
The Horodno Bookshop Lady, correct?
Well, actually, for a long time it was called Garfinkel's Spirits.
Okay,
that's the name of the distillery, the vodka distillery in the book. Okay. And some people didn't like that name, particularly my daughter-in-law. So I ended up. Somebody actually suggested this name to me, and I thought it was an apt title.
Okay. And we'll get in and kind of talk a bit about it in a little bit, but I wanted to kind of give either our listeners and our viewers a little bit of background on how you got into writing this book.
Sure. Well, my parents both passed away in 2009, and the year my mom died, actually, I had planned. We had talked for years and years about going together to Clymer, Pennsylvania, which is where she grew up. It's a small coal mining town in the western part of the state, and unfortunately, her yearly reunions or 5-year reunions always coincided with the start of school for me. So I never made that trip. And then the year I finally was going to do it, no matter what, she passed away. So I felt like I had this unfinished business. I knew my father's side of the family really well, because they are all New Yorkers. They're extroverted, very political, very involved, very verbal. You never have to guess what they're thinking. My mother's side of the family, her father, my grandfather, was very taciturn, didn't say much, and her side of the family was not as educated, although she was very bright. She went to college. And so, but as a result of all that, I knew a lot less about her side of the family. And I did some work on Ancestry.com. And for a while, I thought I was going to be writing more of a memoir type book about my mother's family, because it's an interesting story. They did come from the Pale Settlement, which is was an area of the Russian Empire where Jews were. It was sort of where they were could permanently reside. They weren't allowed into Russia,
right?
The main part of Russia, and there were stories about escaping from the Tsar's army and the trip over. Nothing really terribly detailed or specific. Just a lot of impressions. So I actually went to Clymer with my cousin, whose mother was my mother's sister, my aunt. And we went there probably 2010 or maybe 2011. We met with a guy who was a town historian. We learned all about the town, and a lot of really interesting things that would make an interesting novel at some point. The year my mother was born, there was a coal mining accident in the town and killed 26 miners. And all through school, she had kids who had lost a father, an uncle, or an older brother in that mine accident. So a very small, school. So
Wow.
kids all knew each other. So that made a deep impression on her. And then, it was really interesting to learn about that in more detail. So as I started to write some stories, it was also sort of a way of work. I was very close to my parents. So sort of writing is a great way to sort of work out grief and, be able to move on and come to some understanding. And I found out through that process that I'm a much better storyteller and a fiction writer than I am sort of a documentarian of, exact, this happened on this date, this happened on that date, that type of thing. So I decided to turn it into a novel and dedicate it to my parents, which freed me up to kind of go where I needed to go to tell a really good story. And some of those fragments that I learned about my mother, and certainly my father's side of the family as well, particularly the political activism on his side of the family, they found their way into the book, which of course is a novel. So that was a meandering answer. I don't know if I.
No, that's perfect. So how long did it take you to write this book?
It's interesting you ask. Today I was cleaning out the study, and I came across. I had been a member of the Burlington Writers Workshop, which is a group in Burlington of writers who share their work and get feedback from other writers. And that had been very foundational for me to get started. And I was going through a number of the things I had written from like 2013. And even as 2013, I was still toying with the memoir genre. So I would say 2014, I made a firm decision I was going to write a novel. So here we are 7 years later.
So talk to us about the process on that. And so you decided, like you said, like 7 years ago, you're going to write it. And what was it like to kind of like switch that into kind of get in that writer's mode? And was it talked about your style? Like, did you take time out of every day, or was it more of like as you had free time, or how structured or how loose were you on setting that up?
I'd say, I was working a lot, particularly in the mornings. And it would vary. I mean, I spent a week one summer in the Vermont studio school, and I was probably working 16 hours a day. I got, a good chunk of the novel written in that week. And I would tend to go in fits and starts. And because it's a historical fiction, unfortunately, I did not do all my research first, which is, I think, probably a good way to approach things, so you don't have to keep stopping. Right. So I had to do a lot of research as we went along, and I realized what was going in the book, because I didn't necessarily start with a strong outline. I started trying to find out, who are these characters? Who are the two protagonists? What do they care about? What are their challenges? What are the stakes involved? And once I kind of got a feel for that through just writing them, and I mean, a lot of writers talk about the characters telling you what to do. At some point, that does happen. But for a lot of the book, it was a wrestling match. But once the characters started speaking to me, then I had to sort of go back and actually do some serious research, and so that I could create a setting that was felt authentic and was believable when I could believe it.
Right.
So it's set in the 19th century. So I had to learn about trains. I had to learn about other technologies. I had to learn about literature that was available at that time. I have one of the characters is a chess player. I had to learn about how did they play chess in the 19th century. Um, and
How
you know,
so as an author, how difficult was it to write a setting that was historical fiction, where how much agency did you not have over your characters because you knew based off of what you know about that context they were in, they wouldn't
yeah.
do that or anything like that.
I had enough agency because I think I didn't buy into the stereotypes of people at that time, the Fiddler on the Roof stereotype or some others. So I think people were individuals within the confines of their times. I actually found that to be helpful because it gave me some structure.
Okay.
So I didn't have to worry about them emailing each other or picking up the phone. I did have to worry about when was telegraph available, that type of thing. When was the steam engine used to fight fires? There was so there's plenty of things I had to find out, but there were a lot of decisions to make, so I certainly didn't feel confined.
Right. And as you said, it takes place in the 19th century.
The bulk of the novel, it finishes up in actually almost the mid 20th century, 1946. Okay. But
did you have to kind of create the timeline of just technology before you kind of paced it out?
It would have been smart if I had done that. But I would bump up. I mean, I probably wrote the book in 3 years, and I spent 4 years editing. So, well, a year and a half of that was actually the publishing process, but there were probably 2.5 years of page by page. What are all the details here that really need to be flushed out? So it wasn't a very efficient way to approach it. I think for the next book, I'll probably get my ducks in order before I actually, start typing. But yeah, it's amazing. And then I wasted a lot of time because, I knew nothing about how do you make vodka. I mean, I knew a little bit, but I'd never done it.
Right.
So, there's a ton of reading, and I probably spent much more time on that than I should have, given that I don't think the average reader is going to care too much as long as it comes across as authentic and,
Right.
Like I learned about pot stills and column stills. A pot still, they make a single batch. A column still can be continuous. And that technology was actually available at that time. But I kind of drove myself a little crazy because I wanted to get everything right. And even now, I know there are some little tiny errors in the book. Hopefully nothing too major. I'm not going to tell you what they are because I'm going to rush through it and see if you can find them. But yeah, there's thousands of little details when you create a setting like that you didn't actually live in. And
right. And so when, as you said, you did a lot of heavy editing on that as well for, as you said, maybe 4 years or so. At what point did you do self-editing? Did you have other people read it, like like any beta readers at all?
From the very beginning, I had to approach as many readers as possible. And I know some authors, and probably some very successful authors, have probably just 1 or 2 trusted readers read the book. But I went with the community approach. So in a way, it's really a community project. From the help I got from the Burlington Writers Workshop. There was a guy named Peter Biello who was foundational for me as well in terms of the encouragement and support I got from him. And on through, my family read the book. They were some of the toughest critics, particularly my daughter. Has written a nonfiction book. She was really tough, but I mean, it was good. The book improved a lot. Right on down to Rootstock. They did a great job with the book. Mark Greenberg as an editor, Tim Newcomb, book design. So
Right.
it's been a good project.
And so what were some of the things that were really special you loved about the book that you had overwhelming feedback to say this needs to get out, it doesn't make any sense or anything like that?
Well, at one point the book was 125,000 words.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
And I whittled it down to 93,000.
And that's still at over 300 pages.
Yeah, but it's an average, the average
Right.
novel, you're coming in around 90,000. So historical novels can be a bit more. So it's in there,
Right.
I had a lot more chess in it because I play a lot of chess. I've taught it in schools. I did a ton of research on it, on 19th century chess. I had a big tournament in there. I had a number of readers say, cut it back, get it out of there. And, so that had to go. I had some secondary characters who I spent too much time developing and on this rather than the main. So that had to go. Some of the history, which wasn't directly relevant to the narrative arc of the story, I had to cut. I had there's two characters. So the male, the first part of the book goes back and forth between Bernard and Esther. She's known as Estes, and Bernard's religious, and she's not. But his parts had a lot of the scenes were in school. Schools were called haters at that time, and a lot of that had to go. So when I was all done, it was pretty streamlined, but it's a bit painful.
Right.
I think they cutting your loved ones or whatever out of the book. It's a much better book for doing that.
And do you and because of that, is there anything that you were able to cut out that you kind of set aside and say, all right, I'm going to try to add this to my next story?
I think if I could, I would, but I don't know. The next story probably is not going to have any chess in it. I don't think there'll be any religious Jews in the next story.
Right. And so give people a bit of a synopsis, kind of the back of the book synopsis of Horodno Burning. Did I say it right?
Yeah. So it's a story about a Jewish couple, as I said, Bernard and Estes, and she's a voracious reader, a feminist before her time. She's influenced by her own mother. She has a mentor who was an actual historical figure, Eliza Orzakova, who was a Polish writer and actually the first woman nominated for the Nobel Prize of Literature in, I believe it was 1905. I don't have my notes right in front of me, but so she had that influence, and she was lonely. She didn't have friends as a child. She also was crippled in one foot, which hampered her a bit. But she was a brilliant intellectual. Bernard also had a nimble mind, but he had a disability. He couldn't read. So they're a very unlikely couple, and they don't actually get together till the second. There's 5 parts of the book. They get together in the second part of the book, and despite their differences, she falls in love. She resists for some time, but he eventually wins her over, and he builds her a bookshop, and she teaches him to read. She's not going to put up with having a husband who can't read, and everything's going pretty well in their lives. This is a time there might be an idea of Jews in Tsarist Russia as being a uniformly horrible experience, but in actuality, under Tsar Alexander II, many Jews actually felt like things were getting better. He was called the Liberator Tsar, not only because he liberated the serfs, but the Jews felt like he was going to liberate them. He never quite did that, but he did give them much more freedom of movement. Many more Jewish students could go to college, university. So it was moving in the right direction. And then, because he allowed some freedom, there was still so much repression. I think the earlier czars, there was so much repression that nobody could even think about rebellion. But once, it's funny the way once the autocrat lets up on the gas pedal a little bit and allows some freedom, people realize what they've been missing. And so there was a big tide of revolutionary groups and movements in Russia. And they made numerous attempts on the Tsar's life. I mean, that would make quite a novel itself. There were at least 5. They blew up a room under his dining room, but just missing him. He had been late to dinner. They blew up. They thought they were blowing up his train, but they targeted the wrong train. A pistol was fired at point blank range. I mean, it's really interesting how close they came. And ironically, on the day that Tsar Alexander II agreed to a constitution, which is a step forward for Russia, that was the day that they assassinated him. And his son Alexander III was quite a brutal man, a fervent anti-Semite. One of the assassins happened to be a Jewish woman. She plays a pretty big role in the book. I don't want to give away too much, but she has a connection to Estes. And she had a secondary role in the assassination. So the Jews were blamed. You had an anti-Semite in charge of the country. So the country just exploded, particularly in Ukraine, which is part of the Pale Settlement, into pogroms, which were, attacks against Jewish people, property, so on. So everything kind of falls apart for Estes and Bernard at that point. Estes is being questioned because of her relationship with Gessie Gelfman, is the historical figure who was involved in the assassination of the Tsar. So she's under surveillance. She's being questioned, and Bernard takes off on a rescue mission to the epicenter where the pogroms are taking place to bring back Estes's aunt. Now, that's all I'll give away. That's quite a bit.
Hey folks, I just wanted to take a quick break and say thank you so much for listening and watching Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. If you can, please subscribe. If you can, hit the like button. Go ahead and leave a review on your favorite podcast app that you might be listening to this on. And remember, always, always support local artists, support local writers, support independent creators. It sure does mean a lot to them. And we will be here at Storycomic to make sure that their voices are being heard. Thank you. So let me ask you, Michael, was there anything in that story? Because as you said, it's like basically like you get 5 parts to it.
Yeah.
And was there anything about the book as you were writing it that you were surprised that was happening?
Well, I didn't necessarily know where I was going to go with it. There's a big surprise towards the end, but I won't give that away.
Right.
I guess I was surprised at that things weren't as, I always thought my ancestors came from Tsarist Russia. They escaping pogroms and horrible, and the conscription of children, and all that stuff happened, but sort of like before and after Alexander II.
Right.
I will say, towards the end of his reign, as the revolutionary activity picked up, the repression also picked up. They kind of went hand in hand at that point. But once people sense, freedom's possible, they have less tolerance for autocracy. And the guy who came after him, he brought back the motto of his grandfather, who was Tsar Nicholas the First, and that was orthodoxy, autocracy, and I forget the third leg. It wasn't good.
Did you? So as you're writing this, because you also have a history in education. Was there anything in there where you're going to say, I need to let people know about this? This is an historical. This is a piece of history that I want to make sure people are aware of.
The pogrom in the book it takes place in a town called Balta, and it was based on real events. I did a lot of reading on that, and I tried to make that as authentic. I tried to make everything authentic, but this one I wanted to add some details that might be tough for people to read.
Right.
But I wanted to make it real.
Right.
So, nobody will come away not knowing what a pogrom was.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, I'd say that. I learned a tremendous amount. Part of the fun of writing historical novels, I feel like I am now an amateur expert on the time period. Right? I stress amateur because there are people who spend their lives on this time period, and they know a lot
right.
of stuff. And I had to learn it sort of on the fly. But.
Right. And so as you said that, as you said, the book was, you kind of had to cut it by 25%, basically, right? Yeah. You had to take. Yeah. So you had to cut out almost like 100 pages of it, then, right?
It's quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Quite a bit.
And okay.
So now I'm told that it really moves well. I think before, people who might not have been interested in a certain section
right.
would get bogged down. Now it moves along. So it's kind of a balancing act. Too many details, can really bore a reader. There's certain things I can read about in great detail because I'm interested in that subject.
Right.
But not everybody's going to be interested in the history of Russia in the 19th century. Mm-hmm. So you want enough details to give the flavor, give the reader an idea that the author has good control of the material, and is, an authority on that subject matter. But yet, finding that right amount is right. Descriptions are great, but you can overdo it.
And so this being like your first published work, and as you said, you wanted to tell the story. What did you learn about telling stories that you didn't know before you wanted to tell the story? If that makes sense.
I don't know if it was new learning, but it was certainly reinforced that there has to be a couple of things. One is there has to be something at stake. If nothing's at stake, why would I care to read it? Right? So in this case, there's a lot at stake. There's freedom. There's life. There's a continuation of the family. And I also, I think when some of my earlier drafts were a little too rosy in terms of the characters, the characterizations. So I added to they became more human.
Right.
And to be, flaws are what make us human in a way. If we didn't have flaws, we'd be machines, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's important to bring those characters to life. And so they sort of had natural flaws, like Bernard couldn't read, Estes had, was lame in one foot. But the type of flaw I had to create was more like a weakness. It might have been a temporary weakness that they had overcome, but something that they did that they were ashamed of, that allowed some growth, not just in the external political world, but also internally.
Did you have any inspirations of people, not maybe like historical parts of your family, but anybody that like presently that you kind of picked out? You don't have to say their names in cases, but like any like picked out some things, just like I like that personality quirk, I'm going to add that in.
I think I have a lot of little fragments. We have a lot of friends, and I think certain mannerisms find their way into the book, not as whole people, but certain behaviors. Something my daughter said when she was a little girl found its way into the book. There's a building scene in the book where they're building the bookstore, and I helped my son build his house, and my father helped me build my house. So certainly I think some of that spirit and camaraderie that we felt is also in that particular scene in the book. So yeah, you definitely, I think the saying, write what you know, is way overdone, because if you just wrote what you know, there'd be nothing new coming out of the world. So I think you can learn. Knowledge isn't finite, so I think you can write anything, but you have to have a feel for it.
Right.
But that writing what you know, I think, being the observer of people, I think that helps, because you can put the trait here, and kind of you have to create a personality that holds together. But
so talking about it, like, going back to the timeline of your process, is like, so you put together, it says it took a few years to write it, took more years to get it edited. At what point did you say, and how would the research you did, and what would, in the process of saying, all right, I think I want to get this published, how did that process go?
From the get-go, I had the idea that I was going to write after I decided to write the novel, got moved away from memoir, I had the idea I was going to get this published. And I had a sense of urgency, because, it's kind of like when you're talking about stakes in the book, right? I felt like I was writing this book because I couldn't actually, I'm not the kind of writer who could write about my parents and publish that, because I just want to change things. I want to mold them a bit, not necessarily just embellish, as my wife would say.
Yeah.
But I had the idea that I was going to have a book from the beginning. It was a crazy amount of confidence, because I hadn't had any writing classes, and I had one very bad writing class I took that turned me off to writing for a few years. I overcame that, and I guess at some point I got some. I was getting pretty good feedback all along. Like, wow, this is good. You should try and publish this.
Right.
So it picked up momentum as I went along. The publishing thing is a real trip too. That could talk a long time about that, but it's not nearly as interesting as the writing part.
But for writers' advice, what would you give? What would you give advice to writers who are like maybe at that stage you were a few years ago, where you're like, all right, I got something, I have it here, but is there a sense of fear of, I don't want to let this out into the world at the same time?
Well, it's definitely, once the book is released, it feels like a release, but also a loss of control.
Right.
And Rootstock Publishing was fantastic because I was not an easy author to work with. I don't know that there are easy authors, but I mean, I was very particular, and we had some tension along the way, but they were wonderful. We worked it out, and as a result, it's a better book because of that process. I would tell writers to make sure that they've done a lot of that before they get to the point of publishing, that they've had people read their work. Good writers read their work and give them feedback.
Yeah.
And if they don't have somebody that they feel they can really count on as a single voice or single feedback, then have a lot of people read it and kind of take the synthesis of what you hear on that. And I certainly took that approach. So I have to thank, I probably had 20, 25, 30 people read parts of the book, and probably 15 people read all the book. And it made the book so much better.
Right.
Because when you're writing it, you're so close to it. I was so close to it that I didn't see it the way somebody who hasn't lived it for 4 years would see.
Right. And what was some of the things once you kind of handed over to Rootstock? What were some of the feedback they gave you that was brand new to what you heard from your friends and family?
I think the editor was very, very good at pointing out a metaphor that may not have been completely spot on. Kind of like when you build something in a room and you make a complete mess, and then somebody comes along and tells you, you got to clean this up. And it was kind of a little bit like that. Like I had I think it was a good book when it went to Rootstock, but it certainly was in a more raw shape than it is as a published book. And I credit the editor, the designer, Stephen and Samantha for that process. When I first went to them, I didn't have a glossary. I had resisted that. I had heard that from a number of readers, and for some reason I was kind of stubborn about that. Because I've read books that have, a lot of Spanish in, and they don't do a glossary. And I thought, you can get most of it from context. I mean, there's maybe 100 Yiddish words, some Russian words. But I guess if you hear things enough times, sometimes you say, okay. So I heard it one more time from the editor, and I put a glossary in. We added the maps. Tim Newcomb, who does cartoons for 7 days, did a really wonderful job on 4 maps in the book.
Right.
We added a historical timeline and historical notes. So I think all those things made the book stronger.
Right.
Made it more of an educational tool as well as an entertainment.
Right. And so, like I said, it's been out for 9 days, and you've gotten some really, really good reviews of the book so far.
There was a really good Kirkus review, which was great, because they can sync you as well. But you don't have to publish it if you don't want. But right. It was great. It was all good. Right. And then if people do read it, I'd love for them to go on to Goodreads and Amazon. I know Amazon's a controversial with a lot of people. I certainly want to support our independent bookstores. That's where I try and buy my books. But a lot of people do shop on Amazon, and if they see a book that has no reviews, that's not very helpful. So
right.
People read it, and they could write a review on Amazon and Goodreads. That'd be great.
Has there been any feedback you had that people had insights that you were not expecting at all and were surprised to hear?
Feedback since the book came out?
Yeah.
Um, you know, I mean, my wife loved it, so that was really important because she was, I think she might have been the first reader of the
Okay.
completed manuscript, and she was a little tough
Mm-hmm.
on the first go round. I mean, she had positive things to say, but she's a straight shooter, and she let me know some things that she thought could be improved.
Right.
And this time, she loved it. But what else could she say? Because I can't change it at this
Yeah.
point. So she had to say that, but hopefully, I know she meant it because she's an extremely honest person.
Right. And so talk a bit about like the marketing of it. How much does because you made did you make the decision? Did you shop around and you kind of settled on rootstock, or was it rootstock from the beginning?
No, it wasn't rootstock from the beginning. I started out trying to find an agent.
Okay.
Everybody had told me, well, if you want to get a big publisher, you need to have an agent. So I probably sent out about 100 letters to agents. I'd say most didn't reply. I got a few nice responses back. We like it, but it's not quite right for us. I got one back who said, too much historical stuff in this book. It's a historical novel, but yeah. So I mean, I know people have spent 5 years trying to get a book out, and it's sitting in the closet somewhere. And I wasn't going to do that. I gave myself 6 months. I started in April when the pandemic started,
right?
Which added some challenge because a lot of small publishing houses weren't operating at full speed. And, I mean, they had like a year wait time or response. Some had. I was going to wait a year to hear from somebody on the book. So I did get maybe 3 contract offers, 4th maybe. But they weren't quite right. One looked like they cranked out about 18 books a month.
Right.
And I didn't know how much editing the books got. I just didn't have a real good feel about it. Another one, actually, I just wasn't comfortable with the other books they carried. I mean, I'm all for diversity, but I don't want to be on the bookshelf next to a climate denier. So,
right.
There's one like that. There was one religious/romantic press that I was a little leery about that one. And then there was one really nice small press, but because of COVID, they weren't going to be able to tell me anything for a few months. I think I probably could have gone with them, but I looked around and I said, wow, there's a publisher right in Montpelier, Vermont. Right. Who knew? Rootstock. And I spoke with Stephen MacArthur. I got a good vibe. I actually spoke with 4 or 5 of the authors that they carry, and they all had good things to say. I like the types of books they're putting out. They put out books that, say something about the world we live in and offers some hope. Right. So I felt good about being part of that, and it's worked out really well.
Right. And so because of this, how much have you had to adjust your, maybe like some events that you're putting together because of COVID? How much adjustment and editing adjustment you've had to do for that?
I don't know, because it's my first novel. I don't know how much I would have been able to do otherwise. I do have an event at the Fairfax Library, which is live, at least at this time, on October 7th. I have something else going on. Oh, November 10th, virtual with the Norwich bookstore.
Oh, okay.
So I've contacted the bookstores. I'll stay on that, the libraries. If everybody's as well set up as you are with this type of system, it would be, would work great.
Right. Yeah. Because and so because I see, because now because of you went through Rootstock Publishing, your book's available on everywhere right now.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. The difference with Rootstock and let's say Harcourt Brace or whatever the big publisher is the big publisher is going to get the books into bookstores across the country because they have the name and so on.
Right.
Smaller independent publishers like Rootstock are going to it's more of a print on demand process.
Right.
So relying more on the author's social media, Rootstock social media, word of mouth, getting reviews out there, and then it can be ordered, like you say, just about anywhere. But probably you're not going to walk into a big bookstore in New York City and see the book there unless I take some down.
And so how did and so for authors that are listening to this is like, man, you know, they're saying, you know, Michael, you get great reviews. How'd you get something on, you know, on the Kirkus? Is that something that Rootstock helped you out with, or is that something that
Rootstock has been very helpful with that.
Okay.
You know, I avoided social media most of my life. I probably got a Facebook account. I don't know you probably know, you did your research. I don't know, maybe it was 3 years ago, but I just have never been drawn to going on.
Right.
But through this process, you know, they recommended I get a Twitter account, an Instagram account, and a Facebook account. Right. I went as far as Facebook, and I do have a website. But,
right. Yeah.
Which is nice. When I contact the library, I can tell them to go to the website, and learn about me, learn about the book.
Right.
Where it is.
Yeah, and I gotta say, it's a really good website too. So
thank you.
Yeah. And so these were some of the tips that they gave you, is like make sure you have a presence.
Yeah, they've been extremely helpful. If I have a question, Samantha gets right back to me. And we've entered the novel in about 4 different contests. So, you know, that could be a game changer if you win a contest. You get a lot of publicity that way.
Right. Yeah. Well, good. So, yeah, I mean, that's really exciting for you. And I know that, and like, I mean, you have like a lot of good, feedback and reviews on the book. And so what are any exclusive announcements of any new book you're working on that you want to?
Well, I just signed up yesterday. I have a friend, Diane Zinna, who used to run the Writer to Writer project with the Association of Writers and Publishers, and that was extreme. I was remiss not to mention that. That was very influential. That sort of happened towards the end of the process before I went out to the publisher. And I had a mentor. I'll just give a shout out to him, Lex Williford. He's a great writer. He won the Iowa Short Fiction Award. He teaches writing down there in El Paso, and he was just wonderful. He actually came up with the name Horodno Burning, so I have to
really all right
shout out for that as well. But Diane Zinna ran this program where she would hook aspiring writers like myself up with more accomplished writers like Lex, and they would read the writer's work. In this case, he read my novel, and he just gave me a ton of encouragement. So that was kind of instrumental in getting me ready to publish. So, anyways, Diane is now teaching a course called A Novel in a Year.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I figured I'm of the age, I don't know if I can take 7 years to write a book. I forget what I'm writing in year 7. You know? So there's 8 of us, and it'll meet throughout 2022, twice a month. There'll be individual sessions with her, and she'll do a close reading of good chunk of what we write, and then the eight of us will be sort of a cohort supporting each other, giving each other feedback. So if you check back with me in November of 2022, if I work hard, I should have a book roughed out.
Right.
And then I'm only going to take a year to edit.
So you find it's important definitely to kind of be your own editor for the first few drafts then, huh?
I think it's important to get feedback on the structure of the book right off the bat.
Okay.
I don't think it's important. I don't think I don't want to get as a writer bogged down in too much grammatical stuff and wording. I don't want to have to make everything perfect before I go on to the next part of the book, because who knows, you may not even use that piece you just wrote. But I think it's important to have the structure down. What's the narrative voice going to be? It's going to be first person, third person is going to be present tense, past tense. Who's telling the story is going to be multiple points of view, single point of view. Those things, I think, will save a lot of work if I can hammer those out. Because I didn't hammer those out at the beginning of Horodno Burning, and I paid for it with a lot of extra work.
So mostly, like you said, more developmental editing instead of line
more
editing.
The big picture. Who are the characters? What are their problems?
Right.
What do they bring to solving those problems? Who's telling the story?
Right.
So, I mean, there are whole courses taught on narration. So in Horodno Burning, for example, it's what I would call a very close third person. So when it's Estes is the point of view character, I'm very close to her. When it's Bernard, I'm extremely close to him. So it's almost like there's a camera on their forehead, and you just the reader's seeing the book seeing the action through their eyes. That's how. But in the historical book, I had some excellent feedback on this, which was extremely helpful. In the historical book, if you're that close, it's like you're seeing everything on the granular level. It's like walking through the woods and you're seeing the lichen on the rock, but you're not seeing the forest. You're not seeing the canopy. So I added some parts where I pulled back.
Okay.
And rather than like give that information to the reader in dialogue, which is really hokey. That comes across as very inauthentic. Because the characters know this stuff. They wouldn't be talking about it.
Right.
I found that it was okay to step back from the character and just be that sort of omniscient narrator voice.
Right.
At the start of various sections, telling the reader what's going on, and then gradually come down into the body of the character, and that seemed to work very well as a device to give both the close view and the distant view.
Are you going to try to aim for another 90,000 words
or less?
Or less?
Or less. I'll contact you when I'm in November if I have a complete book.
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Yeah. So, yeah, Michael, we're at the top of the hour now. So, like I said, congratulations on releasing your book. That's fantastic. And people can kind of go to michaelfriedthall.com. This is where they can.
Yeah, they can learn more about the process, about the story, a little bit about me.
Yeah. Cool. Excellent. Well, Michael, thanks again. Thank you so much. And you're going to have to come back when your second book comes out.
I will, in 11 months. Well, 11 months from January.
Okay.
Barney, it was great talking to you.
Yeah, it was great talking to you too.
Enjoyed it. So I guess I could have kept going that route, but I didn't want to. I know people who spent like five years trying to get a book out to the world, where it ends up in their closet. Oh, your daughter stuck back in.
I'm gonna have to edit this part out. Girls, go.
You don't have to.
No, for the video purposes, I will later. Girls, go. You can see him after. Daddy, go.
It's good.
All right, let me timestamp this. I'm gonna edit.
No, I think you should keep it in.
Maybe I'll keep it as like the after credits section or something.
Makes you very real.
Yeah.
The author said, keep it. It's real life.
Yeah.